At first, Chica looks simple: a yellow chicken, a bib, a cupcake, a food mascot in a pizza restaurant. She feels like the character you understand immediately, which is why the deeper Chica timeline is so strange. Because when you follow her from the earlier implied events, through the missing children, through the old restaurants, the toy rebrand, the nightmare versions, the punishment loops, Pizzaplex, and the ruined future, a pattern starts to show up. Chica is almost never the loudest character in the room, but she still keeps standing near the beginning of the worst part of the story. Tonight, we're going to solve a quiet question that sits underneath her entire timeline. Why does the character built around food, parties, and children's entertainment keep becoming one of the franchise's biggest symbols of being consumed? And by the end, the answer is going to connect Susie, the Fruity Maze, Withered Chica's "I was the first" line, Toy Chica's rebrand, Nightmare Chica's teeth, Glam Rock Chica eating trash, and the one idea that makes Chica feel less like a side character and more like the first witness to the entire tragedy. This is the complete Five Nights at Freddy's Chica timeline to fall asleep to. So like, comment, subscribe, and get your blanket ready. Let's start before Chica is haunted, before the jump scares, before the office doors, before the cameras, before the Pizzaplex. At the beginning, Chica is a brand character. That sounds obvious, but it matters. In the world of Five Nights at Freddy's, these animatronics are not originally built to be monsters. They are built to sell a feeling. Freddy Fazbars Pizza is supposed to be a family restaurant. Children come in for their birthday parties. Parents come in because the place is affordable entertainment. The animatronics perform because they are the hook. Freddy gives the restaurant a face. Bonnie and Chica fill out the stage. Foxy gives its variety, and Chica's role, even from her design, is connected to the restaurant itself. She is not just a singer in the band. She's the food mascot. That's why the bib matters. Let's eat. It is bright, silly, child-friendly, easy to print on merchandise, easy to understand from across the dining room. Chica tells you what the building wants you to do. Eat pizza, stay longer, celebrate here, spend money, trust the mascot. And that's the first layer of Chica's horror. She begins as a mascot of comfort. She belongs to the part of Freddy's that is supposed to feel safe. Food, birthday cake, cupcake, and the warm chaos of children's restaurants. But in Five Nights at Freddy's, every safe symbol eventually gets inverted. The stage becomes a crime scene. The mascots become a body. The back rooms become a trap. The restaurant becomes a place where children disappear. And Chica's the food mascot. And Chica, the food mascot, becomes the character who quietly tells you what the franchise is really about. Consumption, not just eating. The company consumes tragedy. The killers consume trust. The building consumes children. The brand consumes the evidence and sells it back as nostalgia. And Chica has been wearing the slogan since the beginning. Let's eat. This is the first thing to keep in mind as we move through her timeline. Chica is not simply a chicken animatronic. She is the restaurant's appetite with a face. Now the second step in the timeline is where Chica stops being just a mascot and becomes connected to a child. This is where we have to talk about Susie. In the larger Five Nights at Freddy's lore, the original animatronics are tied to missing children incidents. Children were lured, killed, and their spirits became attached to the animatronic suits. The exact mechanics of possession are debated because Five Nights at Freddy's loves making everything slightly indirect, but the broad idea is one of the oldest pillars of the series. The machines are haunted because the children died there. For Chica specifically, the strongest connection is Susie. Susie is the name most commonly associated with the spirit possessing Chica, and the key piece of evidence comes from Freddy Fazbear's Pizzaria simulator through the Fruity Maze minigame. Fruity maze looks harmless at first. That is usually how Five Nights at Freddy's gets you. It looks like a simple arcade game. A girl, a maze, fruit is collected, bright colors, something you might always ignore if you did not know how this series hides knives inside of children's games. But as the minigame continues, the mood changes. The imagery becomes darker. The girl's dog becomes part of the scene. The yellow rabbit appears, and the implied story is brutal. Susie is lured by William Afton through emotional manipulation, likely through the claim that the dog is still alive or can be found. This is the moment Chica's timeline becomes tragic, because if Susie is Chica, then Chica's origin is not hunger, it's grief. A child loses or worries about her dog. An adult uses that grief against her. The yellow rabbit becomes a promise. The promise becomes a trap. The child becomes tied to an animatronic built to entertain other children. That detail matters because Chica's design is all about appetite and food. But Susie's story is about trust being weaponized. And that gives Chica two meanings at once. On the outside, Chica invites children to eat. On the inside, Chica carries a child who was consumed by the restaurant's hidden violence. That contradiction is the heart of her character, because she's both the mascot and the victim, the sign and the evidence, the party and the thing buried underneath it. And if we follow one of the strongest theories in the series, Susie may not just be one of the missing children. She may be the first. This is where the timeline gets dark. In Ultimate Custom Night, Withered Chica says one of the most important lines Chica has ever been given. I was the first. Have you seen everything? That line is short, but it opens a hole in the floor. First what? First killed? First possessed? First to wake up? First of the missing children incident? First to understand what had happened? The game does not hand us a clean answer. That is why the line has lasted so long. But when you combined it with Susie's connection, the strongest reading is that Chica's spirit may have been the first victim among the missing children. If this is true, the emotional shape of this timeline changes completely. The missing children incident is often talked about as a group tragedy. 5 children, 5 spirits, 5 animatronics, a set. But tragedies do not start at sets. They begin with one person, one first victim, one first lie, first door closing. If Susie was first, then Chica was the first haunted member of the band, the first child inside the machine, first one to experience the impossible confusion of being dead and still moving. And then maybe she watched the others arrive. That is what makes the line, I have seen everything, feel less like a random threat and more like a witness statement. Chica saw the beginning. She saw the band fill up with ghosts. She saw the restaurant continue. She saw the company cover things up. She saw the bodies get reused, redesigned, and repackaged. She saw the story repeat. That is why I think Chica is one of the most underappreciated characters in the franchise. She's not the main villain. She's not the biggest mystery. She's not the final boss. She's the witness. And witnesses in Five Nights at Freddy's are rarely clean narrators. They are broken, scattered, coded in minigames, hidden in arcade cabinets, or speak one sentence from inside a punishment loop. Chica's timeline is not loud because trauma is not always loud. Sometimes it's a broken bird on stage saying, I was the first. Now from here, we move into the earliest restaurant era, and this is where Chica's physical body becomes important. Before we meet Chica in the first game, the timeline suggests that there was an earlier version of the classic animatronics. These are the older suits that later appear as the withered animatronics in Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Withered Chica is one of the most disturbing designs in the entire series, not because she is the sharpest, because she has the most teeth, but because she looks wrong in a very specific way. Her jaw hangs wide open. Her arms are locked out. Her hands are gone. Her body is damaged, but not in a cool monster way. She looks like a performance machine that was broken, stored, and dragged back out because the company was not finished using it. That's a very Fazbear Entertainment image. The company does not treat animatronics like bodies. It treats them like assets. Old parts can be reused. Old shells can be stored. Old mascots can become backup entertainment, spare parts, or historical clusters. But if Chica contains Susie, then Withered Chica is not just damaged equipment. She is a child's vessel left to rot. That is the deeper horror of the withered animatronics. They are not only scary because they look broken, they're scary because they imply neglect after death. The child does not get to rest. The body doesn't get dignity. The company just puts the suit somewhere and moves on. Withered Chica's pose is one of the strongest in the series. Arms out, mouth open, frozen in gesture that looks like a hug, a warning, a broken performance, or a failed attempt to reach out. That is the thing about Chica's design language. She often looks like she's inviting you closer. Let's eat. Come here. Follow me. Look at what happened. That invitation is exactly what makes her origin with Susie so painful. If Susie followed a promise into danger, then Chica's entire body becomes a corrupt invitation. A mascot built to welcome children now carries the memories of a child who should not have been followed. Now in release order, we meet regular Chica first in Five Nights at Freddy's 1, but in the internal timeline, Withered Chica comes before the cleaned up classic version. That matters because the series shows us the mask before it shows us the wound. Five Nights at Freddy 1, Chica looks worn but still complete. She stands on stage with Freddy and Bonnie. She has her bib on. She has her cupcake. She moves from the stage through the dining area towards the right side of the office. She is scary in a straightforward way. If you do not manage the doors and cameras, she will kill you. But the subtle detail is the kitchen. Chica is strongly associated with the kitchen in Five Nights at Freddy's 1. You cannot see the kitchen camera. You can only hear it. When Chica is there, you hear clanging, dishes movement, metal against metal. She becomes an unseen presence in the room where the food is made. That is not a throwaway detail. The food mascot haunts the kitchen. The camera cannot show it to you. That is the earliest example of Chica being more interesting than she looks. Freddy has the music. Bonnie has the hallway pressure. Foxy has the spirit. Chica has the off-screen kitchen. She is the thing you hear before you see. And for the fall asleep lore video, I think that's the perfect image. The restaurant is empty. The stage lights are low. The camera feed is dead. And somewhere in the kitchen, the yellow chicken is moving around in the dark, surrounded by plates, ovens, counters, and the ghost of what the building pretends to be. A place that feeds children, that consumes them. Now we need to talk about the cupcake, because the cupcake is one of those Five Nights at Freddy's objects that looks like a joke until it comes back. In the first game, Chica carries a cupcake on the plate. It has eyes. It has a candle. It looks almost alive. But in that early Five Nights at Freddy's way, where you're not sure if you're supposed to think about it too hard. But Five Nights at Freddy's teaches its audience to think too hard about everything. So people started asking questions. Is the cupcake alive? Part of Chica? Possessed? Symbolic? Or is it just a prop? Or is it Chica's first hint that she is not one thing, but a character surrounded by smaller symbols of hunger, bait, and watching? Do not answer that yet. Just keep that in the back of your mind. Because the cupcake starts as a joke. Then later, the franchise keeps making smaller food-shaped things, feel weirdly alive. Now, when people first played Five Nights at Freddy's 1, most of the lore was hidden behind newspapers, clippings, phone calls, environmental details, and the simple nightmare of surviving until 6 a.m. Chica was scary, but she wasn't treated as the key to the story. Freddy was the mascot, Foxy was the fan favorite, Golden Freddy was the mystery. Bonnie had the early terror of appearing at the door. Chica at first glance was the other one, but that is exactly why she works. Chica is the character you underestimate because her design is the least mysterious, and then the later games start folding her backwards towards the timeline. That brings us into Five Nights at Freddy's 2. This is where Chica splits, not literally in a possession sense, but symbolically. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is where Chica splits into two public identities, Withered Chica and Toy Chica. The Five Nights at Freddy's 2 location is supposed to be new and improved, and the old animatronics are joined by the toy versions that are cleaner, shinier, more kid-friendly, and connected to a stronger sense of corporate safety. The toy animatronics are supposed to be the replacement future. Toy Chica is the rebrand. She's brighter, smoother, more plastic, more polished. Her design is more intentionally cute and commercial. She is a version of Chica that looks like the company is saying, "We fixed it." But Five Nights at Freddy, the original, is built on the idea that the rebranding does not heal anything. Toy Chica is not simply a harmless replacement. At night, she becomes uncanny. Her beak breaks. Her eyes change. The cute design suddenly feels hollow. She is supposed to be a cleaner version, but the danger is still present. This is a major Chica timeline point. Withered Chica is the old wound. Toy Chica is the corporate cover. The company does not comfort what happened to the old animatronics. It creates shinier ones and keeps going. This is one of the most consistent ideas in all of Five Nights at Freddy's. Fazbars Entertainment's answers to horror is almost never honesty. It's the branding. Old location has a problem, build a new one. Old animatronics are scary, toy animatronics. Old tragedy becomes rumors, make a horror attraction. Old murders become legends, make games about them. Old characters become outdated, build glam rocks. The surface changes, everything stays the same. Toy Chica also has one of the most famous small visual clues in the earlier Five Nights at Freddy's theory culture, the missing beak. In Five Nights at Freddy's 4 minigame era, fans have become obsessed with Toy Chica missing her beak because Scott Calton himself had once pointed towards tiny detail in Five Nights at Freddy's 4 being important. That tiny detail becomes a part of a massive timeline debate about the bite of 83, the toy animatronics, memories, and the order of events. Now, not every old theory around Toy Chica's beak survived cleanly. Five Nights at Freddy's theory had changed a lot since then, but the beak still matters as an example of how Chica functions in the franchise. She leaves crumbs, not full answers. A missing beak on a toy, a girl in an arcade, a line in an ultimate custom night, a cupcake with eyes, a kitchen you can only hear. Chica's timeline is built out off details that seem too small until you start arranging them together. Now, while Five Nights at Freddy's 2 gives us both Withered Chica and Toy Chica, it also enforces, or I should say reinforces, a core idea. Children's entertainment technology is never truly natural in the franchise. The toy animatronics are supposed to protect children. They are supposed to be safer. They are tied into technologies that sound advanced and security focused, but yet they still become threats. That makes Toy Chica more than a replacement. She becomes proof that technology cannot fix a moral problem. You can only upgrade the face, smooth the plastic, or try to build new systems. But if the company underneath is still built on denial, the new version becomes haunted by the old lie. That's why Toy Chica belongs in a complete Chica timeline. Not because she is necessarily the same spirit as the classic Chica in the simplest way, but because she is the same symbol wearing a new shell. Food mascot, rebrand, danger. Now after Five Nights at Freddy's 2, and before the later modern storyline, this timeline starts folding into dreams, memories, and nightmares. That brings us into Five Nights at Freddy's 4. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is not mainly a Chica game. It's a game of a child's bedroom, the bite of an 83 Fredbear, Spring Bonnie, nightmare animatronics, and the fear of something coming down the hallway after the lights go out. But Nightmare Chica is a crucial version of the character, because Nightmare Chica takes every soft part of Chica and weaponizes it. The bib remains, the bird shape remains, Cupcake remains, but now the teeth are monstrous. The body is sharpened. The mascot is no longer performing in a restaurant, she is invading the house. That's a huge shift. Classic Chica belonged to the pizzeria. Nightmare Chica belongs to the bedroom. That means the fear has escaped the building. For the child at the center of Five Nights at Freddy's 4, Freddy is not simply a restaurant. It's a mental place, a memory place, a fear that he might follow him home and wait in the hallway. Nightmare Chica's role in that it is specifically tied to the eating symbolism again. She becomes teeth. She becomes the threat of being consumed. A nightmare cupcake becoming more direct. The food props turn into the predator. This is why I think Nightmare Chica is one of the most symbolic forms of Chica. She shows what Chica looks like when the child-friendly mask is removed. Not cute food, teeth, and fear. Not let's eat as a slogan, let's eat as a threat. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 also helps explain why Chica is a good character for a sleepy documentary. Her timeline is not just chronological, it's a psychological. She moves from brand mascot to haunted vessel to damaged asset to a rebranded toy to a nightmare object. Each version is a different way the same symbol can rot. Now somewhere in this larger timeline, the Fazbear story becomes legendary. That turns us into Five Nights at Freddy's 3. In Five Nights at Freddy's 3, the main physical animatronic is a spring trap. The setting is Freddy Fazbear's Fright, a horror attraction built around the old Freddy Fazbear rumors. This is one of the most disturbing concepts in the series, because it means the tragedy has become entertainment again. Murders become stories, stories become legends, legends become haunted attractions. People are buying tickets to echo the child's death. People are buying tickets to the echo of child death. That is Fazbear horror at its most cynical. Chica appears here as Phantom Chica, and her role is quieter. She is not the main body in the building. She's more like a hallucination, a memory imprint, a face on an arcade cabinet that suddenly becomes part of nightly horror. That fits her perfect for this timeline. At this point, Chica is no longer just a robot. She's an image in the Fazbear myth, a phase that can be reused, a memory that can be triggered, a mascot reduced to a haunted symbol inside a horror attraction. Phantom Chica is the food mascot as a haunted advertisement for an attraction built out of old pains. She is not the star of Five Nights at Freddy's 3, but she is part of proof that the Fazbear history cannot stay buried. Even when the bodies are gone, the image remains. Even when the restaurant is gone, the brand survives. And in Five Nights at Freddy, the brand is almost as dangerous as the killer. Now we reach Freddy Fazbear's Pizzaria Simulator, one of the most important games for Chica's human story. Pizzaria Simulator begins like a joke. It tends to be a restaurant management game. You buy equipment, you place attractions, you improve your pizzeria. It's almost like the franchise is just mocking itself. But underneath that surface, the game becomes a trap designed to gather remaining haunted things and burn the story down. For Chica, the key is not a salvage section. The key is Fruity Maze. This is where the Susie connection becomes the strongest in the games. The mini-games give Chica's spirit a human shape, or at least gives the player the clearest path to understanding the girl behind Chica. Susie is important because Five Nights at Freddy's victims can become abstract if you only think of them as animatronic ghosts. Freddy Kid, Bonnie Kid, Chica Kid, Golden Freddy Kid, and on. Susie has a name, an emotional wound, a dog. She has a moment where she is manipulated. That changes Chica forever. Once you connect Susie to Chica, every version of Chica becomes sadder. The kitchen noise is not just animatronic roaming. The broken jaw is not just cool horror design. The "I was the first" line is not just a threat. Chica's entire timeline begins with a child believing someone who sounded helpful. That is why the first witness theory is so strong emotionally. If Susie was first, then the beginning of the missing children incident was not just chaos. It was quiet. It was one child and one lie. Then everything else followed. Now the pizzeria simulator, we reach Ultimate Custom Night. Ultimate Custom Night is difficult because its place in the timeline is not straightforward as the normal restaurant setting. Now imagine the timeline one last time slowly. A child walks into a restaurant. The walls are bright, stage is loud, mascot band is friendly. Somewhere, a yellow chicken holding a cupcake. Somewhere else, a yellow rabbit saying something a child wants desperately to believe. Years later, the chicken is moving in the kitchen where the cameras don't work. Years after that, her body is broken and stored, then redesigned, then remembered as a nightmare, turned into a phantom, then given a name, then given a line. I was the first. I have seen everything. And decades later, in a massive neon pizzaplex, another version of Chica digs through the trash, loses her voice, and wanders the ruins of a company that still does not know how to stop eating. That is the complete Chica timeline. A story about a mascot built to feed children, carrying the memories of a child the restaurant consumed. And maybe that's why Chica stays with the people, even when they do not realize it. Because she's not the loudest ghost. She is the first plate set on the table, the first crumb on the floor, first door left open, the first witness standing under the stage lights, still holding the cupcake, still smiling through the mask, still waiting for someone to understand what she saw.